The Miami courthouse smelled like industrial cleaner and broken promises. Rachel Hood stood in a borrowed cream dress, not white. She'd refused white, listening to the man she was about to marry say the 6 words that would define the next 4 months of her life. This is a contract, not a romance. Tan Jin-ho, 33-year-old Korean Mafia boss, controller of Miami's port operations, the man her father had sold her to for $200,000, leaned close enough that his breath brushed her temple during what should have been their wedding kiss, and then he whispered, "I'll never love you." Rachel felt something inside her go numb, not her heart breaking. She'd never been naive enough to expect love from this arrangement, but her dignity. The last shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would choose her instead of using her. Here's what I need you to tell me in the comments. If someone married you purely as a business transaction and told you on your wedding day they'd never love you, would you walk out? Or would you stay and prove them wrong? And if you're ready to experience this heartwarming Mafia romance story, do me a favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to join the family, because this story goes places you absolutely will not see coming. Trust me. But to understand how a former federal prosecutor ended up in a courthouse marrying a man she'd only met twice, standing in a dress that felt like a cage, while he promised her nothing but emotional distance. We need to go back 3 weeks ago, to the moment Rachel's father made a choice that would trade her entire future for his gambling debts. 3 weeks earlier, Rachel's father called her on a Tuesday afternoon while she was reviewing case files at a Starbucks in Coral Gables. She remembers because she'd just ordered her 3rd venti cold brew, the kind of caffeine dependency that came from spending 3 years at the U.S. Attorney's office building RICO cases that could dismantle entire criminal organizations. "Rachel, sweetheart." Michael Hood's voice had that particular texture it only got after too much Johnny Walker Blue. "I need you to come to the house. There's something we need to discuss." She should have known then. Should have heard the resignation underneath the false cheerfulness. But Rachel had spent her entire adult life believing that competence was a form of protection, that if she was smart enough, capable enough, successful enough, she could insulate herself from the chaos her father carried like a second skin. She was wrong. When she arrived at his Coconut Grove apartment, modest by Miami standards, a 2-bedroom he'd been renting since her mother died, Michael was sitting at the kitchen table with a man Rachel had never seen before. Silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of careful posture that suggested he billed by the quarter hour. "This is Mr. Calloway," her father said. "He's an attorney representing certain business interests in Miami." Rachel's prosecutor instincts activated immediately. The phrasing, the vagueness, the way Calloway's eyes assessed her with the clinical precision of someone evaluating an asset. "What kind of business interests?" she asked. Calloway slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single document, dense legal language, but the summary was devastatingly clear. Marriage contract. Rachel Elizabeth Hood and Tan Jin-ho. Consideration. Full forgiveness of debts, owed by Michael Hood in the amount of $200,000, plus accumulated interest. Rachel's vision tunneled. "Dad, what did you do?" "I got in over my head." Michael wouldn't meet her eyes. "Horse racing, poker games, some investments that didn't pan out. The people I borrowed from, they're not the kind you negotiate payment plans with, sweetheart." "So you sold me?" Her voice came out flat, emotionless, because if she let herself feel the betrayal, she'd shatter right there in his kitchen. "It's not like that." But even he couldn't make the words sound convincing. "Mr. Tan is a businessman, legitimate operations. He needs someone with your background, your legal expertise. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Calloway interjected smoothly. "Mr. Tan controls significant port operations in Miami. He's currently facing a federal investigation preliminary, nothing concrete yet, and he requires legal counsel who understands the complexities of RICO prosecutions. Your father mentioned your background at the U.S. Attorney's Office." And there it was. Rachel wasn't being married for alliance or appearances. She was being acquired for her skill set. Her father had traded her competence the way other desperate men traded family heirlooms. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Calloway's expression didn't change. "Then your father's debts remain outstanding. The parties he owes are less patient than Mr. Tan, less inclined toward negotiated solutions. Rachel looked at her father, this man who'd raised her alone after her mother's death, who'd promised he'd stop gambling after the intervention 3 years ago, who was now sitting across from her with tears in his eyes and whiskey on his breath, waiting for her to save him one more time. She thought about walking out, about letting him face the consequences of his choices, about choosing herself for once. But the thing about being raised by an addict is that you learn early how to carry weight that isn't yours, how to fix problems you didn't create, how to sacrifice your own oxygen mask because watching someone else suffocate feels worse than slow suffocation yourself. When? Rachel asked. 3 weeks, Calloway replied. Mr. Tan prefers to expedite the arrangement, which brought her here. To a courthouse that smelled like government-issue cleaning products and institutional despair, to a ceremony that lasted exactly 7 minutes, to a judge who read the legal requirements with the enthusiasm of someone processing parking violations. Jinho arrived alone. No family, no friends, no one to stand witness to this transaction except Calloway, who signed the marriage certificate with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Not marriages, necessarily, but contracts. Agreements that bound people together with ink instead of affection. Rachel studied her husband because that's what he was now, legally, while the judge droned through the vows. He was exactly as she remembered from their 2 previous meetings, tall, impeccable in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, hair-styled with the precision of someone who controlled every detail of his presentation. His face could have been carved from marble, beautiful in an austere way, but utterly unreadable. He never looked at her during the ceremony. Not once. His attention stayed fixed on the judge, on the documents, on everything except the woman whose name he was binding to his. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," Jinho turned with calculated economy. His hand touched her elbow, not her waist, not her hand, her elbow. Like she was a colleague, he was steering through a doorway, and he leaned in close enough that his breath brushed her temple. "This is a contract," he said, voice so low only she could hear. "Not a romance. I'll never love you." Then he stepped back, signed the marriage certificate with a Mont Blanc pen that probably cost more than her Georgetown law textbooks, and walked out of the courthouse alone. Rachel stood there under the fluorescent lights, feeling the weight of the ring he'd slid onto her finger, white gold, elegant, purchased by someone's assistant without consultation, and realized she'd just legally bound herself to a man who had mastered the art of presence without connection. Calloway appeared at her elbow. "Marcus is waiting outside to drive you to the residence. Mr. Tan has business to attend to." Of course he did. The drive to Brickell took 12 minutes through afternoon traffic. Marcus, Jinho's driver, a man in his 50s with the watchful eyes of former military, navigated the black Mercedes G-Wagon with practiced ease, while Rachel sat in the back seat, watching Miami blur past the tinted windows. "The penthouse is on the 47th floor," Marcus said, his voice neutral but not unkind. "Mr. Tan has arranged for you to have the east wing. Bedroom, bathroom, sitting area. He occupies the west wing. The central spaces, living room, kitchen, library, are shared, though Mr. Tan typically leaves at 6 a.m. and returns after midnight." Rachel processed this information with the clinical detachment she'd learned to employ during difficult prosecutions. Separate wings, minimal interaction, a marriage that existed on paper and nowhere else. "Is there anything you need me to know?" she asked. "Rules? Expectations?" Marcus met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Tan values privacy and discretion. Beyond that, you're free to do as you wish." Free. The word tasted like irony. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of luxury that whispered rather than shouted. Doormen in suits, valet parking, a lobby that looked like a W hotel spread in Architectural Digest. Rachel followed Marcus into a private elevator that required a key card, watched the numbers climb, and tried not to think about how this gleaming cage was now her home. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. And there he was. Jinho, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, on his phone speaking rapid Korean. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her arrival. Just continued his conversation as if she were air. Marcus set her bags 2 suitcases containing everything from her old apartment that had mattered near the entrance, and quietly retreated back into the elevator. Rachel stood in the doorway of her new life, watching her husband's back, listening to words she couldn't understand, and wondered if he'll never love her. What exactly did she just become to him? 3 days. That's how long it took Rachel to map the geography of her new prison. The penthouse was approximately 4,500 square feet of marble, glass, and expensive silence. The east wing hers contained a bedroom with a king bed dressed in fret linens, a bathroom with a soaking tub and rainfall shower that looked like something out of a Restoration Hardware catalog, and a small sitting area with furniture so pristine she suspected no one had ever actually sat on it. The west wing Jinho's remained a mystery. The door stayed closed. She'd walked past it twice in 3 days, both times hearing nothing from the other side. For all she knew, he didn't even sleep there. Between the two wings lay shared spaces neither of them used. A living room with a sectional sofa facing windows that overlooked the bay. A chef's kitchen with Viking appliances and a sub-zero fridge stocked by someone Rachel never saw, and a library lined with law books, Korean literature, and a first edition of The Great Gatsby that looked untouched. It was beautiful, immaculate, and it felt like living in a museum after closing time. Rachel spent those first 3 days unpacking her minimal belongings. 4 boxes containing books, clothes, her MacBook Pro, and a framed photo of her and her younger sister, Kiana, taken before their mother died. Everything fit into the East Wing's walk-in closet with room to spare, which only emphasized how little of her old life she'd been allowed to bring. She saw Jinho exactly twice. Once on the morning of day 2, when she emerged from her room at 6:15 a.m., to find him leaving through the private elevator. He wore a navy suit, was on his phone speaking Korean, and his eyes passed over her like she was part of the furniture. No acknowledgement, no greeting, just the soft ding of the elevator, and he was gone. The second time was late on day 3, well past midnight, when she heard the elevator arrive and watched his silhouette pass through the living room toward the west wing. Again, no acknowledgement. He moved through the shared space like a ghost who'd forgotten it was haunted. Communication happened through intermediaries. Marcus delivered groceries she hadn't ordered, organic produce from Whole Foods, the kind of expensive basics that suggested someone had made assumptions about her preferences. A housekeeper named Maria appeared on day 2, introduced herself in accented English, and explained she came twice a week to clean. An interior designer texted about updating the East Wing to Mrs. Tan's preferences, which felt absurd since Rachel had no preferences for a space she hadn't chosen to occupy. Mrs. Tan. The name felt like a costume that didn't fit. On the afternoon of day 3, Calloway arrived. Rachel was sitting in the living room, her first venture into the shared space, attempting to read a legal thriller on her Kindle and failing to focus. When the elevator opened and Calloway emerged carrying a banker's box, she felt something shift. This wasn't a social call. Mrs. Tan. He set the box on the dining table with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. I apologize for the intrusion. We need to discuss a developing situation. Rachel closed her Kindle. What kind of situation? A federal grand jury has opened an investigation into Mr. Tan's business operations. Calloway's voice carried the careful cadence of someone who billed $800 an hour and earned every cent. Financial records, witness interviews, the whole architecture. They're going after the port operations. Rachel's prosecutor instincts activated immediately. How long do we have? 6 months. Maybe 8 if we're lucky. He gestured to the box. These are the subpoenaed documents. I thought you might want to review them. Why would I? But she stopped, understanding clicking into place. Because I was a prosecutor. Because you were an excellent prosecutor. Calloway met her eyes. You know how they build these cases. RICO statutes, wire fraud, conspiracy charges constructed from phone calls and flipped lieutenants. Mr. Tan's operations are sophisticated, but the federal government doesn't care about sophistication. They care about patterns. Rachel moved to the table, opened the box. Inside were financial records, corporate filings, witness statements, the building blocks of a prosecution she would have salivated over 3 months ago. Mr. Tan's organization doesn't deal in street-level operations, Calloway continued. He specializes in trade route consolidation, controlling the flow of legitimate goods through the Port of Miami, while leveraging strategic consulting fees from importers who want their shipping containers prioritized through customs. A gray market empire, Rachel murmured, scanning a shell company registration. Legal on paper. Ruthless in execution. Calloway pulled out a document. He owns a fleet of refrigerated trucking through a company called Coastal Logistics. 2 waterfront warehouses registered under Maritime Holdings LLC, a stake in a logistics software company that tracks container movements with algorithmic precision. Everything generates enough clean revenue to justify his lifestyle. But the consulting fees are the problem. The consulting fees are extortion dressed in business casual. Calloway's expression remained neutral, and someone, somewhere, has started connecting dots. Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She'd built these cases. She knew exactly how they worked: the patient accumulation of evidence, the pressure on mid-level operators until someone flipped, the slow construction of a narrative that turned business decisions into criminal conspiracy. "You weren't just married for your father's debts, were you?" she asked quietly. Calloway had the grace to look almost apologetic. Mr. Tan needed someone who understood federal prosecution strategy, someone who could anticipate the government's moves. "Your expertise is valuable." Valuable. Not her. Not Rachel Hood, human being with autonomy and dignity. Her expertise. The skills she'd spent 3 years honing at Georgetown Law in the U.S. Attorney's office, now owned by a man who'd married her like he was acquiring intellectual property. Her father called at 7:43 p.m., 3 hours after Calloway left. Rachel almost didn't answer. But some masochistic part of her needed to hear his voice, needed confirmation that this betrayal was real, and not some nightmare her exhausted mind had constructed. "Baby girl." Michael Hood sounded drunk. Happy drunk, the worst kind. "I just wanted to say thank you. You saved your old man. I know it wasn't what you wanted, but you did the right thing." Rachel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the Miami skyline blur as tears she refused to shed made her vision swim. "How much did you actually owe them, Dad?" $200,000. But it wasn't really about the money, sweetheart. It was about respect. About you gambling away everything Mom left us and expecting me to fix it. Silence. Then, "Rachel, you sold me." Her voice came out flat, clinical. "You sold my competence, my legal skills, my entire future because you couldn't stop betting on horses and playing poker with money you didn't have. And you called me here drunk to thank me for it? It's not like that. It's exactly like that." She ended the call before he could respond, before the anger burning in her chest could turn into something messier, more vulnerable. Rachel Hood had spent her 20s believing that competence was armor, that being smart enough, capable enough, successful enough would protect her from the chaos that had killed her mother and consumed her father. But competence hadn't protected her. It had made her valuable. And her father had sold that value like it was his to trade. She went numb after that. Just shut down. Because feeling the betrayal meant confronting the truth she'd been avoiding her whole life. The belief that someone would choose her, not use her, had always been fantasy. At 3:17 a.m., Rachel gave up on sleep. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating, the kind of expensive quiet that came from soundproofing and isolation. She'd grown up in a cramped apartment where walls were thin and neighbors were loud. This place felt like sensory deprivation. She found herself in the kitchen, making chamomile tea she didn't want, just to have something to do with her hands. The sound of the elevator made her jump. Jinho appeared in the doorway like a shadow given form. He wore a white t-shirt and gray Nike sweatpants, the first time she'd seen him in anything other than a suit. His hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked, for the first time, like a person, instead of a profile. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Rachel shook her head, not trusting her voice. He moved to the counter with the easy familiarity of someone who knew this kitchen well, pulled down a second mug from the cabinet, and poured himself tea from the kettle she'd just boiled. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, 6 feet of granite countertop between them, and drank in silence. Rachel studied him over the rim of her mug, noticed things she hadn't before, the slight shadows under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping either, the tension in his shoulders, even in casual clothes, the way his fingers tapped against the ceramic in an unconscious rhythm. "You don't have to stay in the East Wing," Jinho said eventually, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. "There's a study on the 3rd floor. Better view. More books." Rachel looked at him, surprised. "Why would you offer that?" He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on something she couldn't see, some memory or ghost that lived behind his carefully constructed walls. "Because you look like you're suffocating," he said finally, "and you look the way my sister looked when she was trapped." Then he set down his mug, turned, and walked back toward the West Wing, leaving Rachel standing alone in the kitchen with 1,000 questions and the first crack in his armor. Sister. He had a sister. Or had one. Past tense, based on the grief that had flickered across his face when he mentioned her. Rachel moved into the study the next morning. It was on the 3rd floor, accessed by a narrow staircase she'd thought was just architectural detail. The space was smaller than her East Wing bedroom, but infinitely more welcoming. Built-in bookshelves lined with legal texts and Korean novels, a desk positioned to face windows overlooking the bay, a leather reading chair that looked actually lived in. And it smelled like him. Like Jinho's cologne, something expensive and understated that she'd caught hints of during their 2 pre-wedding meetings. Cedar and bergamot and something darker she couldn't name. As she unpacked her books onto the shelves, Rachel found herself wondering, who was his sister? Why did comparing Rachel to her feel less like an observation and more like a confession? And what kind of trap was Jinho remembering when he looked at her? 2 weeks into the marriage, Rachel found the problem. She was in her study now, though she still felt like an intruder every time she climbed those stairs reviewing the subpoenaed documents Calloway had left. Building a defense strategy the way she used to build prosecutions, methodically, looking for gaps in the timeline, inconsistencies in witness statements, evidence that could be challenged on procedural grounds. The federal government's case was solid, but not airtight. They had financial records showing suspicious payment patterns, testimony from mid-level operators describing the consulting fee structure, surveillance logs tracking meetings between Jinho and known importers. What they didn't have yet was the smoking gun that connected Jinho directly to the criminal enterprise. That's when she found the handwritten notes. 7 pages buried in the 3rd document box, tucked between corporate tax filings and shipping manifests. Meeting minutes from a warehouse negotiation 2 years prior, written entirely in Korean. Neat, precise handwriting that somehow reminded her of Jinho's careful signature on their marriage certificate. Rachel stared at the indecipherable characters, frustration building in her chest. These notes could be critical details about negotiation terms, admissions of criminal intent, evidence that could either save Jinho or destroy him. But without translation, they were useless. She couldn't use a professional translation service. Too risky word might get back to the prosecution that the defense had flagged specific documents as important. She couldn't use Google Translate on handwritten text, especially not with industry-specific jargon that required cultural context. Which left exactly one option. Rachel pulled out her iPhone and texted the number Calloway had given her for emergencies. Need to speak with Jinho. When is he available? The response came 30 seconds later, but not from Calloway. I'm in the study doorway. What do you need? Rachel's head snapped up. Jinho stood at the top of the narrow staircase, dressed in dark jeans and a black Henley casual for him, though he still looked like he'd stepped out of a Tom Ford ad. She hadn't heard him approach, which unsettled her in ways she didn't want to examine. How long have you been standing there? She asked. Long enough to see you scowling at those documents. He moved into the room with the quiet confidence of someone who owned the space but rarely occupied it. What's the problem? Rachel slid the handwritten pages across the desk. These are meeting minutes from a warehouse negotiation. I can't read Korean, and I can't risk using an outside translator. I need to know what they say. Jinho picked up the pages, his dark eyes scanning the text. Something flickered across his face recognition, maybe concern, but it disappeared too quickly for Rachel to identify. I'll translate them, he said simply. You don't have to. You need to know what they say. I'm the only person who can tell you without creating additional risk. He pulled out the desk's second chair, a reading chair Rachel had pushed against the wall, and positioned it beside hers. This will take a few hours. Do you have time? Rachel nodded, suddenly hyper-aware of the proximity. They'd barely spoken since the 3 a.m. kitchen encounter 2 weeks ago. Now he was sitting close enough that she could smell his cologne, that cedar and bergamot combination that had infiltrated her study, and see the fine details she'd never noticed before. The slight scar above his left eyebrow. The way his jaw tightened when he concentrated. Let's start with page 1, Jinho said, his voice dropping into the low, steady tone of someone settling in for sustained work. For 3 hours, they sat side by side at the desk. Jinho translated with clinical precision, rendering the Korean into English without editorializing or softening the language. Rachel typed everything into her MacBook, occasionally asking for clarification on technical terms, or asking him to repeat phrases she wanted to capture exactly. It was the longest sustained conversation they'd had, And while the content was purely professional negotiation terms, shipping container priorities, payment structures, there was an ease to it that surprised her. Jinho asked smart questions. Can they use this document if they can't establish chain of custody? What if we argue the handwriting isn't mine? He understood the legal jeopardy he faced with remarkable clarity. Rachel found herself impressed, despite her intention to remain emotionally neutral. This wasn't the cold businessman who'd married her in a courthouse. This was someone who'd built a sophisticated operation through intelligence and strategy, not violence. Someone who thought 3 moves ahead, who understood that the federal government's power came from patience, not force. Halfway through the 4th page, Jinho leaned over to point at a specific line in the document. His hand brushed hers where it rested on the keyboard. It was brief, an accident of proximity, nothing more. But neither of them moved away immediately. The contact lasted maybe 3 seconds, but Rachel felt it like an electric current running up her arm. This phrase, Jinho said, his voice quieter now, seemingly unaffected by the touch that had just rewired Rachel's nervous system. It doesn't translate directly. The closest English equivalent would be, to carry the weight together. It's what you say when you're offering partnership in a difficult situation. Rachel forced herself to focus on the words instead of the fact that his hand was still on the desk, inches from hers. She typed the translation, then paused. Is that what you were doing? She asked. In this negotiation? Jinho was silent for a long moment. His eyes stayed fixed on the Korean text, but Rachel got the sense he was seeing something else, some memory playing out behind his careful expression. I was trying to, he said finally. The person I was negotiating with, Park, owner of a competing warehouse operation, didn't trust me. He thought I was trying to take over his territory, not collaborate with him. Refuse the partnership. What happened to him? 6 months later, a rival organization moved in and destroyed his operation. Undercutting his prices, intimidating his clients, leveraging connections Park didn't have. Jinho's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. If he'd carried the weight with me, if he'd trusted that I was offering genuine partnership instead of a hostile takeover, he'd still be in business. The subtext hung in the air between them, heavy and unmistakable. Partnership requires trust, and trust is what I've learned to live without. Rachel wanted to ask why, wanted to understand what had happened, to make this clearly intelligent, strategically minded man decide that operating alone was safer than risking collaboration. But the vulnerability in his voice, so slight she might have imagined, it suggested that question would shatter whatever fragile détente they'd built over the past 3 hours. Instead, she said, that must have been difficult, watching someone reject help and then suffer for it. Jinho glanced at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment Rachel saw something raw in his eyes, something that looked like recognition, like he was seeing her, not Mrs. Tan, not the legal asset he'd acquired, but Rachel Hood, a person who understood what it meant to carry weight alone. Yes, he said softly, it was. His hand stayed on the desk, inches from hers, for the remainder of the session. When they finished, the Miami sky outside the study windows had gone dark. Jinho stood, stretched slightly, a surprisingly human gesture that reminded Rachel he'd been sitting in the same position for 3 hours straight. Send me the final summary when you're done, he said. I'll review it tonight. Jinho. Rachel heard herself say his name, his actual name, not Mr. Tan, not my husband, in that detached way she'd been using in her head. He paused at the top of the staircase. Thank you. For this, you didn't have to spend your evening translating documents. He looked back at her, and something in his expression shifted. Softened, maybe, though the change was so subtle it might have been a trick of the lamplight. You're trying to save me from 20 years in federal prison, he said. The least I can do is help you understand the evidence. Then he was gone, his footsteps quiet on the stairs, leaving Rachel alone in the study that smelled like his cologne. She stared at the spot on the desk where their hands had touched, replayed the moment in her mind, the brief contact, the fact that neither of them had pulled away, the way something in the air between them had changed when he translated to carry the weight together. Rachel closed her MacBook and admitted a truth she'd been avoiding. She'd started wanting him to prove that his cold distance was just armor. That underneath the clinical detachment was a person capable of connection, of partnership, of carrying weight with someone instead of alone. 3 weeks into the marriage, Rachel discovered the rooftop garden by accident. She'd been searching for better cell signal. The penthouse's thick walls turned her iPhone into an expensive paperweight, when she noticed a narrow door at the end of the West Wing hallway. Unmarked. Easy to miss. The kind of architectural detail that suggested it led to a utility closet or maintenance access. It led to paradise. 52 floors above Miami, the rooftop garden sprawled across what must have been 1,000 square feet of premium real estate. Bamboo privacy screens, teak planters overflowing with jasmine and bougainvillea, a covered pergola with outdoor furniture that looked like a West Elm photo shoot. The view stretched across Biscayne Bay to Miami Beach, the water reflecting afternoon sunlight like hammered silver. Jinho had never mentioned this space, never suggested she might want to use it. But the fact that it existed, that he'd created this sanctuary and kept it to himself, felt like the most revealing thing she'd learned about him yet. Rachel set up her MacBook on the teak dining table under open sky, surrounded by witness depositions that needed review. The federal government's case was built on testimony from mid-level operators, people who'd taken deals to avoid prison. She needed to find inconsistencies, timeline gaps, anything that could create reasonable doubt. The Miami summer storm hit without warning. One moment, the sky was clear. The next, clouds rolled in like something out of a Michael Bay film, dark, fast, apocalyptic. Rachel barely had time to register the first drops before the sky opened completely. She grabbed her laptop, clutching it against her chest as rain hammered down with the kind of intensity that only happened in South Florida. Her white Everlane t-shirt was soaked through in seconds, her hair plastered to her face, papers scattering across the deck like confetti. She ran for the covered pergola and found Jinho already there, holding a towel. He stood under the shelter like he'd been waiting, dressed in dark jeans and a black hoodie, his hair slightly damp. He must have seen the storm coming. Must have known she was up here. Without a word, he draped the towel over her shoulders. Rachel stood there, shivering and watching rain hammer the city below. The Brickell skyline disappeared behind sheets of water, just ghostly outlines of buildings and the occasional lightning flash that made everything look overexposed and surreal. "I used to love storms," she said, not sure why she was telling him. Maybe because the sound of rain created a kind of privacy, a white noise that made confession feel safer. "When I was a kid, I'd sit on the fire escape outside our apartment and just watch. It felt like the world was resetting, like everything dirty was being washed away." Jinho didn't respond immediately. He stood beside her, not close enough to touch, but closer than he'd been since the translation session, his dark eyes fixed on the storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "My sister used to say that thunder was the sky mourning." The words came out carefully, like he was handling something fragile. I never understood what she meant. Rachel turned to look at him. Really look at him. The careful mask he always wore had cracked. She could see grief in the lines of his face, in the way his jaw tightened, in the raw vulnerability of someone who'd just spoken a truth they usually kept buried. "I think," Rachel said carefully, her voice gentle. She meant that even the sky needs to grieve. That holding it in doesn't make the pain go away. It just makes the storm worse when it finally comes. Jinho's hands clenched the pergola railing. His knuckles went white. His breathing changed just slightly, but Rachel heard it. The sound of someone fighting to maintain control. They stood together in the rain-sound silence, and for the first time since the courthouse, Rachel felt like they were inhabiting the same emotional space instead of just occupying the same physical one. The storm lasted 17 minutes. When it finally passed, leaving the city washed clean and glistening, Jinho was the first to move. He stepped back from the railing, his composure sliding back into place like armor he'd temporarily removed. "You should go inside," he said, handing her the towel properly this time. His fingers brushed hers, brief, accidental, electric. "You're shivering." But his voice had lost its edge. The clinical distance that usually characterized every interaction had softened into something that sounded almost like concern. Rachel watched him walk back toward the penthouse, leaving wet footprints on the teak deck, and felt something shift in her chest. That night she couldn't stop thinking about his sister. Rachel sat in the study with her MacBook, typing "Korean organized crime Busan kidnapping" into Google. The search results came back immediately. Dozens of archived news articles from 2008, Korean tabloid coverage, even a Wikipedia entry about territorial disputes in Busan's shipping district. She found the article at 2:47 a.m. Teen killed in shipping territory dispute, the 18th of September 2008, Busan Daily News. The photograph showed a young girl with serious eyes and an unguarded smile. Minji Tan, age 13. Kidnapped for leverage in a business negotiation. Found dead 3 days later. Rachel closed the laptop, her hands trembling. Jinho didn't just lose his sister. He learned that love is a weapon people use against you. That caring makes you vulnerable to unthinkable loss. The man who said, "I'll never love you," wasn't being cruel. He was being honest about the only way he knows how to survive. But what happens when survival stops being enough? 4 months after the courthouse wedding, Rachel's world collapsed on a Friday afternoon. She was in the study reviewing surveillance logs, the kind of tedious work that required 3 cups of Nespresso and a Spotify playlist she'd titled Focus or Die, when she heard Jinho's phone ring somewhere in the Jinho's phone ring. Penthouse below. His voice carried up through the open stairwell. Controlled at first, speaking Korean in that measured tone she'd come to recognize as his business voice. Then something shifted. The control sharpened into something harder, more urgent. She heard him switch to English mid-sentence. "How many counts?" Rachel's hands stilled on her keyboard. Footsteps on the stairs. Fast. Jinho appeared in the study doorway, his face a mask barely holding together. He wore a navy Tom Ford suit, perfectly tailored, but his tie was loosened like he'd been pulling at it. His knuckles were white where they gripped his iPhone. "They've charged me," he said. His voice came out flat, clinical. The tone of someone forcing themselves not to feel. RICO conspiracy, 18 counts, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit extortion. They're moving for asset forfeiture. Rachel stood slowly. Her prosecutor instincts kicked in immediately, running through the legal playbook even as her heart started hammering. When did the indictment come down? 30 minutes ago. Calloway just got the call from the U.S. Attorney's office. Jinho crossed to the window, his back to her. "They have recordings. Phone calls between me and the warehouse managers. Lee flipped gave them everything. Routes, payment structures, names, dates. 4 years of operational details." Rachel's stomach dropped. Lee was Jinho's longest-serving associate, the man who'd helped build the port operation from the ground up. If he'd cooperated, the government had everything they needed. "What's Calloway's assessment?" she asked quietly. Jinho's laugh was bitter. 20 years minimum if this goes to trial. Federal sentencing guidelines don't leave much room for negotiation on RICO charges. 20 years. Rachel did the math automatically. Jinho would be 53 when he got out. His entire empire dismantled, his wealth seized, his life reduced to a cell in a maximum security facility somewhere in the federal system. "There's a way out," Jinho said, still facing the window. Rachel waited. "Full cooperation. I give them everything. Names, organizational structure, financial records, testimony against everyone in my network." His reflection in the glass looked ghostly, unreal. "In exchange, I get immunity. The charges disappear." "Witness protection," Rachel said. "Not a question." "Complete relocation. New identity, new city, new life. The government erases Tan Jinho and creates someone else." He finally turned to face her. "And here's the problem you're in, Rachel. You're legally tied to every asset they're trying to seize. The penthouse, the cars, the bank accounts. Your name is on half of them as my spouse." The trap crystallized in her mind with horrible clarity. "If you stay in Miami after I enter witness protection," Jinho continued, his voice tight, "the federal government will subpoena you, investigate you. They'll assume you were complicit, that you knew about the criminal operations. Your background as a prosecutor will make it worse. They'll think you were advising me, helping me avoid detection. I can prove I wasn't involved. Maybe. Eventually. But the investigation alone destroys your reputation." Jinho stepped closer, and she could see the exhaustion in his face, the fear he was trying so hard to hide. "Even if you avoid criminal charges, every law firm in the country will see you as toxic. The woman who married a mob boss and claimed she didn't know. Your career is over either way." Rachel felt the walls closing in. She'd spent 4 months building a defense strategy, believing they could win this fight. But witness protection wasn't winning. It was erasure. "I need you to come with me," Jinho said quietly. Rachel stared at him. "Into witness protection. I know what I'm asking. New identities, new city, complete separation from everything you know. Your family, your friends, your career, all of it gone." His hands flexed at his sides. "But if you stay, they'll bury you to get to me, and I won't let that happen." Something in Rachel's chest twisted. 4 months ago, this man had told her their marriage was a contract, not a romance, had walked out of the courthouse without looking back. And now he was offering to protect her at the cost of everything he built. Jinho's composure finally cracked. He stepped closer, close enough that Rachel could see the fine tremor in his hands, the raw vulnerability in his eyes that he'd kept locked away for 4 months. "I'll never love you," he said, and his voice was stripped raw now, all the careful control gone. "I can't. I won't let myself. Because everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me or used against me, and I can't survive losing someone else." His hand rose like he wanted to touch her face, hovered in the air between them for a heartbeat, then fell. "But I need you to survive this. I need you to come with me." The words came out rough, desperate. "Not because of the contract, not because of your father's debt. Because I can't do this alone." Rachel couldn't breathe, couldn't move. "For 4 months, I've watched you work yourself exhausted trying to save me," Jinho continued. "You never complained. You never asked for more than I offered. You just stayed. And I don't know how to tell you what that's meant, but..." His voice broke. "I can't walk into witness protection alone. I need you there. Not as my wife on paper. As someone who sees me. As Rachel." Something cracked in Rachel's chest. This man who'd built an empire on emotional detachment, who'd warned her that love was a luxury, who'd kept 6 feet of distance between them for 4 months, was asking her to choose him. Not because she had to, because he couldn't face oblivion alone. She opened her mouth to respond. Jinho's phone rang. He answered it without looking away from her. "What?" His expression changed instantly. "How many? Where are they now?" Rachel watched fear replace vulnerability on his face. "Understood. Lock down all access points. I'm leaving now." He ended the call, his hand already reaching for Rachel's wrist. His grip was firm, urgent. "We need to leave. Right now." "Jinho, what?" "Someone just tried to breach the building's parking garage. Armed. Professional. They're coming for me before the arraignment, before I can enter witness protection." He was already pulling her toward the stairs. "We have 60 seconds before building security can't guarantee our safety." Rachel let him pull her forward, her mind reeling. From "I'll never love you" to "I can't do this alone" to armed men in the parking garage trying to kill them. Who's trying to kill the Korean Mafia boss before he can become a federal witness? And what happens when his only way out requires her to run into danger with him? The safe house in Coconut Grove smelled like salt air in someone else's life. Jinho had driven them here in a blacked-out Range Rover that appeared from a private garage Rachel didn't know existed, navigating Miami's evening traffic with the kind of focused intensity that left no room for conversation. The property was waterfront, a mid-century modern house hidden behind royal palms and bougainvillea, owned by a shell company that probably had 3 more shell companies behind it. "Stay inside," Jinho said as they entered through the garage. "Don't go near windows. I need to make some calls." Then he disappeared into what looked like a home office, his phone already pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean to someone on the other end. Rachel stood in the unfamiliar living room, West Elm furniture, abstract art that looked expensive. A kitchen stocked like an Airbnb that saw occasional use, and felt the adrenaline from their escape start to fade into something that felt uncomfortably like fear. Someone had tried to kill them. Armed. Professional. The words kept repeating in her mind like a broken algorithm. She could hear Jinho's voice through the office door. He'd been on the phone for over 40 minutes now, first with building security, then Callaway, then what sounded like federal contacts. His tone shifted between English and Korean, always controlled, always strategic, even when discussing men with guns who'd breached his building. Rachel needed to move, to do something with her hands that wasn't thinking about assassination attempts and witness protection and the way Jinho had said, "I need you," like the words were being torn from his chest. She found herself in the master bedroom. It was sparse, almost impersonal, a king bed with white parachute linens, a dresser that held nothing, a walk-in closet that smelled faintly of cedar. This wasn't Jinho's primary residence. This was a contingency plan, a place to disappear when Miami became too dangerous. The small wooden box was tucked in the back corner of the closet, behind where clothes would normally hang. Rachel's hands moved before her conscience could stop them. She opened the lid. Inside was a single envelope, the paper yellowed with age, addressed in careful Korean script. Next to it, a photograph. Teenage Jinho, maybe 16, still soft around the edges in a way his adult face had forgotten with his arm around a young girl at a beach. She had his serious eyes, his focused expression, but her smile was unguarded in a way his had never been. The back of the photo read, Summer 2008, 3 months before. Before what? Rachel opened the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written by someone still learning English, dated the 15th of September, 2008, 3 days before the news article she'd found, 3 days before Minji disappeared. Opa, I know you think I don't notice when you're sad, but I do. You carry everything so quietly, like you're afraid if you make noise, the world will collapse. I want you to know it's okay to let people in. It's okay to need help. It's okay to love someone even when it's scary. Father says we have to be strong all time, that showing weakness is dangerous. But you're already strongest person I know. You taught me to be brave. Now I want to teach you to be soft. It's okay to need people, Appa. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. I love you always. Minji. Rachel's vision blurred. Tears she didn't remember shedding dripped onto the aged paper, and she tried to wipe them away before they could damage what was probably Jinho's most precious possession. Rachel. His voice came from the doorway quiet, devastated. She looked up to find Jinho frozen there, his phone still in his hand, his face drained of all color. He stared at the letter in her hands like she was holding his beating heart. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. I shouldn't have. Jinho crossed the room and sank down beside her on the closet floor. Not angry, just broken. He took the letter from her hands with infinite gentleness, his fingers brushing hers, and stared at his sister's handwriting. She wrote this the week before, he said, his voice hoarse and raw. I didn't read it until after. I couldn't. Rachel stayed silent, giving him space to breathe through whatever memory was suffocating him. I was 16. Minji was 13. Jinho's words came slowly, like each one cost him something. There was a territorial dispute in Busan. A rival organization wanted my father to step back from a shipping contract that would have secured our family's future. His jaw tightened. They took her for leverage, sent photos of her tied up, terrified, begging. My father. He stopped, his breathing ragged. My father refused to negotiate. Said giving in would show weakness, that Minji would understand, that she was a soldier in the family war. Rachel's heart shattered. They found her body 3 days later in a storage unit near the docks. Jinho's voice broke completely, and at the funeral my father cried. Talked about honor and love, like grief absolved the choice he'd made. He looked at Rachel then, and his eyes were bright with tears he refused to let fall. I told myself I'd never let caring about someone make me vulnerable again. That love was a weapon people used to destroy you, that the only way to survive was to be alone. Rachel reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined on the closet floor, holding each other in the wreckage of his past. But you walked into my house like you belonged there, Jinho continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. You sat in my study and read, and never demanded I become someone different. You just existed, competently, quietly. And every time I saw you with that same focused intensity Minji had, his voice caught. Something in my chest tightened. You made me want to let someone in, he whispered. And I don't know how to do that without falling apart. Rachel squeezed his hand. You don't have to do it alone. You don't have to carry all the weight by yourself. Jinho pulled her closer until their foreheads touched, his free hand coming up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. I'm terrified, he admitted. Terrified that needing you will get you killed, that caring about you makes you a target, that I'll lose you the way I lost her. Then we'll figure it out together, Rachel said firmly, her hands tightening on his. We'll carry the weight together. Jinho's breath caught. His eyes searched hers. You remember that? I remember everything. His phone rang, shattering the moment. Jinho answered without moving away from her. Calloway. His expression shifted as he listened. Tomorrow morning? That's... He went quiet. What kind of deal? Rachel watched fear replace vulnerability on his face. I understand. Jinho's voice had gone flat again, carefully controlled. We'll be there. He ended the call and looked at Rachel with something that looked like grief. Federal prosecutors want to meet tomorrow morning, not Monday. They're moving up the cooperation timeline because of the assassination attempt. He paused, his hand still cupping her face. But there's something else. They want to offer you a separate deal. Immunity in exchange for testimony about my operation. The world tilted. "They're going to ask you to choose between saving yourself and coming with me," Jinho said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "And Rachel, I can't. I won't ask you to sacrifice your life for someone who can't promise to love you back." Rachel's phone buzzed at midnight. She was sitting on the safe house's West Elm sectional, staring at nothing, when Calloway's name lit up her iPhone screen. Jinho had disappeared into the master bedroom an hour ago, his shoulders carrying the weight of 18 federal charges and an assassination attempt he was trying to process alone. "Come to my office," Calloway said without preamble. "Now. Alone. It's midnight." "I'm aware of the time, Mrs. Tan. This can't wait." Rachel looked toward the closed bedroom door. "Does Jinho know about this?" A pause. "This meeting is for you. Downtown. 23 minutes if you leave now." The line went dead. Rachel grabbed her Kayana tote and slipped out through the garage, calling an Uber before she could second-guess herself. The driver, a college kid listening to Bad Bunny, navigated empty Miami streets while Rachel's mind raced through possibilities. None of them good. Calloway's office occupied the 23rd floor of a brickle high-rise that looked like every other glass tower choking the Miami skyline. The lobby was deserted except for a security guard who waved her through like he'd been expecting her. The elevator ride felt eternal. Calloway was waiting in the conference room. So was a stranger 50s, gray Brooks Brothers suit, federal ID clipped to his belt like a warning label. "Mrs. Tan," Calloway said, his voice carrying that careful neutrality that made Rachel's prosecutor instincts scream. "This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Brennan." Brennan didn't offer his hand, just slid a manila folder across the table. "I'm handling Mr. Tan's cooperation agreement," he said, "and I'm here to offer you something better." Rachel opened the folder. Inside was a single-page dense legal language that her Georgetown-trained brain processed in seconds. In exchange for testimony regarding Tan Jinho's organizational structure and operations, Rachel Hood receives full immunity from prosecution and will not be required to enter witness protection. Free to resume legal career without restriction. The words blurred slightly. Rachel blinked, forcing focus. "You want me to testify against him," she said flatly. "I want you to tell the truth." Brennan leaned forward, his expression almost sympathetic. "Mr. Tan's cooperation is valuable but incomplete. There are gaps, financial structures he didn't handle directly, meetings he didn't attend. You spent 4 months embedded in his operation. You reviewed his files, met his associates. You're married, you have access, even his closest people don't." Rachel's hands tightened on the folder. "I was his legal consultant." "You were his wife," Brennan interrupted gently. "And in the eyes of the law, that makes you a potential co-conspirator, unless you help us." The room went quiet except for the hum of the building's ventilation system. "Your father traded your freedom for his gambling debts," Brennan continued. "You didn't choose this marriage. You didn't choose to be tied to a RICO conspiracy. Take your life back, Miss Hood. Don't let loyalty to a business transaction destroy your future." Everything Rachel had lost her career at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Her reputation, her sense of self was being offered back like a Nordstrom return she could exchange for store credit. All she had to do was confirm that the man who'd held her in a closet while confessing his deepest wound was guilty. "I need to think about it," Rachel heard herself say. Brennan nodded. "You have until Monday morning, when Mr. Tan's arraignment happens. After that, this expires." Rachel entered the safe house at 1:30 a.m. to find Jinho standing by the bay windows, a silhouette against Miami's sleeping skyline. "They offered you a deal," he said quietly, not a question. Rachel froze. "How did you—" "Calloway told me after you left. He thought I should know." Jinho still hadn't turned around. "It's a good deal, Rachel. You should take it." "Jinho, you don't owe me anything." His voice was carefully controlled, each word measured like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. "You didn't choose this. Your father chose it. I chose it because I needed an asset. Now you have a chance to undo it all." He finally turned, and the resignation on his face nearly broke her. "I don't want to be another person who takes your choices away," he said. And Rachel understood. This was Jinho's version of love, letting her go even when it destroyed him, giving her the freedom his father had denied Minji. She crossed the room until she stood directly in front of him. "What if I choose you?" she whispered. "Rachel, you can't. What if I choose this?" Her voice grew stronger. "Not because I have to, not because of a contract or debt or fear, but because for the first time in my life, Someone is asking me to stay instead of using me to leave. She stepped closer. My father used me to clear his debts. The U.S. attorney wants to use me to fill gaps in their case. But you're asking me to run with you. Not because you need my testimony or my skills. Because you can't do this alone. And that's the first honest thing anyone has asked of me in years. Jinho's hands trembled as they reached for her face. His thumb brushed her cheek with devastating gentleness. I can't promise safety, he said hoarsely. Can't promise stability. Can't promise I'll be good at this, at letting you in, trusting someone, being the partner you deserve. Their foreheads touched. An almost kiss, but something deeper. But if you come with me, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice, he whispered. I'll try to be the person Minji thought I could be, someone who understands carrying weight together doesn't make you weak. I'm still terrified, he admitted. But more terrified of facing witness protection alone than of letting you see all the broken parts. Rachel closed her eyes, existing in this moment where choosing him was still possible. Dawn broke through the windows. Sunday morning. 24 hours until arraignment. Whatever you decide, I'll understand, Jinho whispered. I won't blame you for choosing yourself. Rachel placed her hands over his. What if I don't need you to promise love? What if I just need you to promise honesty, to keep showing me the truth underneath the armor? She picked up Brennan's folder from where she'd dropped it, held it between them like evidence neither could ignore. I have 24 hours to decide who I want to be, she said. The woman who takes the safe path, or the woman who walks into the unknown with you. Jinho watched her walk toward the bedroom, folder in her hands, and for the first time since Minji died, he found himself praying someone would choose him. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Rachel couldn't sleep. Sunday afternoon sunlight filtered through the safe house blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the bedroom where Brennan's folder sat on the nightstand like a bomb waiting to detonate. 18 hours until arraignment. 18 hours to choose between saving herself and walking into oblivion with a man who couldn't promise to love her. She opened her MacBook Pro instead. Not to decide, to understand. Rachel pulled up the prosecution's evidence files, the documents she'd been reviewing for 4 months, building Jinho's defense like she was constructing a cathedral from scattered bricks. But this time, she wasn't looking for gaps in their case. She was looking for truth. The shell company caught her attention immediately. Maritime Logistics Solutions, LLC. Registered in Delaware. Operations based in Miami. The prosecution had flagged it as one of Jinho's primary vehicles for the port operations consulting fees. Transaction history dating back to 2019, payments from importers. Wire transfers to offshore accounts. The whole architecture of a criminal enterprise. But something didn't align. Rachel cross-referenced the corporate filing date against Jinho's cooperation agreement timeline. He'd told federal prosecutors he arrived in Miami in 2011, started building his legitimate businesses in 2015. Maritime Logistics wasn't established until 2022. Except the transaction history started in 2019, 3 years before Jinho supposedly created the company. Rachel's heart started hammering. She pulled up the Delaware corporate registry, searching for the original registered agent. Vincent Kang. Filed March 2019. She typed the name into Google, and her screen filled with results. Vincent Kang arrested 2018 for RICO conspiracy related to Miami port operations. Charges mysteriously dropped 6 months later, now listed as business consultant in Coral Gables. Political donations to 3 city commissioners, 1 state legislator, a federal Department of Commerce official. Rachel grabbed her phone and dialed before her rational brain could stop her. Calloway. I need you at the safe house. Now. Jinho was asleep when Rachel knocked on the master bedroom door at 3 p.m. She found him sprawled across the bed in a white Everlane t-shirt and Lululemon joggers, his hair mussed, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. Exhaustion had carved shadows under his eyes, the toll of 4 months fighting federal charges and 24 hours running from assassination attempts. Jinho. She touched his shoulder gently. He woke instantly. The way people do when they've learned sleep is a luxury that can be interrupted by violence. His hand reached for something under the pillow, a gun. Rachel realized with a chill before his eyes focused on her face. Rachel. His voice was rough with sleep. What's wrong? I need your phone passcode, she said. There's something in the evidence files that doesn't make sense, and Calloway's on his way, but I need to verify. Jinho was already unlocking his iPhone, handing it to her without question. The intimacy of the gesture, him trusting her with access to everything, made her chest tighten. She pulled up his email archives while Jinho watched, gradually becoming alert. "What are you looking for?" "Communications with Vincent Kang." Jinho went very still. "How do you know about Kang?" "Because he registered maritime logistics 3 years before you supposedly created it." Calloway arrived 37 minutes later. The safe house living room transformed into a war room, Rachel's MacBook on the coffee table, Jinho's phone displaying email threads. Printed corporate filings spread across the West Elm sectional, like evidence at a crime scene. Calloway's face progressed through emotions like a time-lapse. Confusion, realization, fear, then something that looked uncomfortably like hope. "Vincent Kang was the original architect of the Miami port operation," Calloway said slowly, his $800 an hour brain processing the implications. "He built the shell companies, established the importer relationships, created the entire infrastructure. Jinho didn't build this empire, he inherited it when Kang's legal troubles forced him to step back." "Why wasn't Kang prosecuted?" Rachel asked, though she already knew. "Political connections, donations to people who matter, enough legitimate business to make prosecution politically complicated." Calloway looked at Jinho. "When did Kang approach you?" 2020. Jinho's voice was tight. "He said he was retiring, wanted to sell his logistics businesses to someone who understood import-export. The operations looked completely legitimate: warehouses, trucking, software. I didn't realize the consulting fees and priority shipping arrangements were already established until I was 6 months in. And by then you were complicit," Rachel finished. The real picture crystallized with devastating clarity. The federal government didn't just want Jinho's cooperation. They wanted him to testify against Vincent Kang, the man they'd failed to prosecute in 2018, who'd been untouchable for years because of political protection. "Yesterday's assassination attempt," Rachel said. "It wasn't from Jinho's rivals. It was Kang's people," Calloway confirmed grimly. "Because Jinho's testimony destroys everything: Kang's legitimate businesses, his political connections, his freedom." Rachel felt ice in her veins. "And if I cooperate with Brennan's deal and testify about Jinho's operation, I'm also testifying against Kang." "Which makes you a target too," Jinho said, his hands clenched. "This isn't just organized crime retaliation, Rachel. This is someone with resources and desperation." Rachel stood, pacing the living room while her prosecutor brain assembled pieces into a narrative that could save them both. "What if we prove Jinho inherited the criminal infrastructure rather than creating it?" she said. "Show prosecutors he's a victim of Kang's system, not its architect." "He's still criminally liable for participating," Calloway countered. "But it changes sentencing exposure, and more importantly," Rachel turned to face them both, "it gives us leverage. Prosecutors have wanted Kang since 2018. If we give them evidence that Kang not only built this operation but actively concealed its criminal nature from Jinho, we can negotiate a deal that doesn't require witness protection." The room went silent except for Miami traffic humming outside. Jinho spoke from where he stood by the window, his back to them. "This requires me to trust you won't use that information against me. That you'll negotiate in good faith, and not just take Brennan's deal once you have everything." Rachel met his eyes when he finally turned. "Yes, it does." The fundamental question underlying everything. Could they trust each other? "If I give you everything," Jinho said slowly, "every document, every communication, every piece of evidence that could save me or destroy me, you'll have the power to choose my fate. You could take it to Brennan, testify against me and Kang, walk away with immunity and your career intact." Rachel crossed the room until she stood directly in front of him. "I could," she said. 3 months ago I probably would have. But that was before Minji's letter. Before you told me you can't do this alone. I'm not going to betray you, Jinho. I'm going to fight for you the way you asked me to run with you. Not because I have to, because I'm choosing to. But you have to choose to trust me," she continued, "completely. No holding back information, no protecting yourself by keeping secrets. If we're doing this, we're carrying weight together." Jinho stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his iPhone and started forwarding emails to her address. "Everything I have," he said, his voice rough. "Every communication with Kang. Every financial record. Every piece of evidence proving I didn't build this from scratch." He looked up. "It's yours. Do what you need to do." By 2 a.m. Monday, they'd built a 47-page brief. The safe house looked like a Warby Parker wearing lawyer's fever dream documents everywhere. 3 MacBooks running, empty Nespresso pods littering the counter. Rachel's eyes burned from 12 hours of sustained work, but the narrative was solid. Emails from 2020 where Kang assured Jinho the businesses were completely legitimate. Financial records showing Kang's shell companies funneling money through maritime logistics years before Jinho's involvement. Testimony from a former Kang associate Calloway had tracked down, confirming Kang had targeted Jinho as a younger Mark who wouldn't ask difficult questions. It wasn't a perfect defense. Jinho was still liable for actions after discovering the truth, but it was enough to change the negotiation. Calloway left at 3 a.m. to meet federal prosecutors before arraignment. Jinho and Rachel sat alone in the wreckage of their work, exhausted and wired on adrenaline. "You didn't have to do this," Jinho said quietly. "You could have taken Brennan's deal and been free." Rachel looked at this man who'd given her every piece of evidence that could destroy him, who'd chosen trust when trust had gotten him hurt before. "I told you I was choosing you," she said. "This is what that looks like." At 3:47 a.m., Rachel's phone rang. She answered on speaker. "Calloway? Prosecutors want to meet, now, before arraignment." His voice was tight with something between excitement and fear. "They've reviewed the preliminary brief. They want to negotiate a new deal. But Rachel, they want you in the room. They want to hear the case directly from you." Rachel looked at Jinho, understanding settling over her like a second skin. She was about to walk into a room with federal prosecutors as Jinho's advocate, using her skills to fight for defense. Complete reversal of everything she'd built her career on. "Are you sure?" Jinho asked. "Once you walk in as my attorney, there's no taking Brennan's deal. You're choosing my side. Publicly, irrevocably." Rachel stood, smoothing her wrinkled theory blazer. "Then I guess I should change into something more appropriate," she said, "for destroying the prosecution's case against my husband." Jinho's breath caught at the word. Husband. Not defendant. Not client. For the first time since Minji died, he allowed himself to hope. Rachel changed into a navy Everlane blazer and theory trousers she'd packed in her emergency go bag, the kind of armor young female prosecutors wore when they needed to be taken seriously in rooms full of men who'd spent decades winning. The federal building at 6:47 a.m. looked like every other Miami morning. Harsh sunlight, glass and concrete, the institutional smell of government, issue everything. But this time, they arrived through the back entrance, flanked by federal marshals whose hands never strayed far from their holsters. Kang's people were still out there, still a threat. Marcus Brennan was waiting in the 4th floor conference room. So were 2 other prosecutors Rachel recognized from her U.S. attorney days, Jenkins and Morales, both senior trial attorneys who'd mentored her during her first RICO case. The surprise on their faces when she walked in on the opposite side of the table was almost worth the career suicide she was committing. "Miss Hood," Brennan said, his tone carefully neutral. "Mr. Calloway indicated you had new information regarding Mr. Tan's case." Rachel set her MacBook on the conference table and opened the brief they'd spent 12 hours building. "I have evidence that fundamentally changes the narrative of this prosecution." For 30 minutes, she walked them through everything. Kang's original establishment of the criminal infrastructure in 2019. Shell companies registered years before Jinho's involvement. Emails from 2020, where Kang explicitly misrepresented the businesses as completely legitimate operations. Testimony from Kang's former associate, a man named John who'd taken an immunity deal in 2018, confirming Kang had specifically targeted Jinho as a younger operator who wouldn't ask difficult questions. Jenkins interrupted halfway through. "Miss Hood, even if Mr. Tan inherited this infrastructure, he still participated for 4 years after acquiring it. He's criminally liable for continued involvement." Rachel didn't flinch. "Absolutely. I'm not arguing complete exoneration. I'm arguing that Mr. Tan's culpability is substantially less than the original indictment suggests. He didn't architect this empire, he was manipulated into maintaining one that already existed." Jinho spoke for the first time, his voice steady. "I'm not proud of the choices I made after I discovered the truth. But understanding how I got into this position matters for understanding what I can offer the government now." Brennan leaned back in his chair, his prosecutor brain visibly recalculating. "What exactly are you offering?" Rachel slid a second document across the table. "One more thing. In reviewing the financial records for Kang's shell companies, I found 3 wire transfers that warrant immediate investigation." The room went silent as the prosecutors read. Wire transfers from Kang's companies to personal accounts belonging to Miami City Commissioner Torres, Florida State Legislator Huang, and a mid-level official at the Federal Department of Commerce. All within 18 months, all coinciding with decisions that directly benefited port operations. This wasn't just organized crime anymore. This was public corruption, career-making cases. If Mr. Tan's cooperation includes detailed testimony about his observations of Kang's political relationships, Rachel said quietly, you're not just taking down a port operator, you're exposing corruption that goes significantly higher than organized crime. Brennan called a 15-minute recess. Rachel and Jinho waited in the hallway while the prosecutors huddled. Jinho's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy intimacy of people who'd stopped pretending distance was safer than connection. Whatever happens, he whispered, thank you for fighting for me when you could have walked away. When Brennan emerged, his entire demeanor had changed. We're prepared to offer a revised cooperation agreement, he said. Mr. Tan pleads guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, not RICO. 18-month sentence, minimum security facility. Upon release, free to resume his life without witness protection, though we strongly recommend continued private security given the Kang situation. Rachel's chest tightened. And Miss Hood? Brennan looked at her with something close to respect. Full immunity, no testimony required. The government acknowledges you had no involvement in criminal activity and were a victim of an arrangement your father made without your consent. However, he continued, Mr. Tan's cooperation must include complete testimony against Vincent Kang, all political relationships, financial transactions, operational details, and the 18-month sentence is conditional on that testimony leading to Kang's conviction. Jinho's voice was steady. When would the sentence begin? Immediately after Kang's trial concludes. Given the complexity, we're estimating 4 to 6 months. Rachel squeezed his hand. 18 months. We can do 18 months. Jinho looked at Brennan. I accept your terms. The next hour dissolved into legal minutia cooperation agreement reviewed page by page, Calloway negotiating visitation rights and communication access with the precision of someone billing by the quarter hour. When Jinho signed the final page, Rachel felt the shift. 20 years reduced to 18 months. Witness protection erasure transformed into temporary separation with the possibility of return. Not freedom, but survival with dignity. 15 minutes later, they stood in an empty hallway waiting for security to escort them back to the safe house. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the same institutional hum as the courthouse where they'd married 4 months ago. What happens now? Jinho asked quietly. I just accepted a deal that takes me away for 18 months. You have immunity, your career back, your freedom. You don't have to. Don't. Rachel cut him off. Don't tell me what I don't have to do. I made my choice last night building that case instead of taking Brennan's deal. I made it in the closet with Minji's letter. In the rain when you told me about her. She stepped closer, taking both his hands. You're going to serve 18 months. I'm going to wait. Visit every week, write you letters, take monitored phone calls. Make sure when you're released, you have something to come back to. Rachel. His voice cracked. You don't know what 18 months is like. People say they'll wait, and they mean it, but I'm not people, she said firmly. I'm the woman who married you in a courthouse when you told me it was just a contract, who spent 4 months feeling like a ghost, who learned your coldness was just armor protecting a wound that never healed. I know exactly who you are, Jinho, and I'm choosing to stay. Jinho's eyes were bright with tears he wouldn't let fall. I still don't know if I can promise to love you. I don't know if I remember how. But I can promise to try. To let you in. To trust that needing you won't end the way needing Minji did. That's enough, Rachel whispered. That's all I need, the promise to try. Because I'll never love you, was you being terrified. But I'm choosing to try, is you being brave. And I'll take brave over perfect any day. Jinho pulled her into an embrace. Not a kiss, but something deeper. His arms wrapped around her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth, and Rachel held him back just as tightly. They walked out of the federal building together into harsh Miami sunlight that made everything feel overexposed and impossibly real. Jinho took her hand, not hiding, just openly holding her in front of federal marshals and morning commuters and anyone watching. 4 months ago, they'd walked out of a different government building as strangers bound by paper. Today, they walked out as partners bound by choice. You know what Minji would say about this? Rachel asked, shielding her eyes from the glare. Jinho's expression softened. What? She'd say thunder is the sky mourning, but sunshine is the sky choosing to try again. He didn't respond with words, just squeezed her hand tighter as they walked toward the waiting car. As they drove away, Rachel looked at the man beside her, the Korean Mafia boss who'd told his bride he'd never love her, who turned out to need her as his only way out, who was now choosing to try, and thought, maybe love isn't about promises. Maybe it's about the daily choice to carry weight together, even when the weight is heavy and the path unclear. And maybe that's enough. Brave hearts, if you made it to the end of this journey from I'll never love you to I'm choosing to try, do me a favor. Smash that like button and drop a comment. Would you wait 18 months for someone like Jinho? Would you build a case to save someone who couldn't promise to love you back? I genuinely want your thoughts on Rachel's choice. And don't forget to subscribe, because I have more stories like this coming. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful love stories aren't about people who promise forever. They're about people who promise to try.